long before the world would call her the saint of impossible causes. Rita of Cascia was simply a little girl who dreamed of silence, prayer, and a life completely devoted to God. She was born around 1381 in the tiny mountain village of Rocca Porena, nestled among the rugged hills of Umbria, Italy. The landscape was breathtaking, but beneath its beauty lay a society consumed by revenge, family feuds, and endless cycles of violence. Even before she could speak, something happened that no one present would ever forget. One warm afternoon, Rita's parents left their infant daughter sleeping in a simple wooden cradle while they worked in the nearby fields. When they returned, they froze in horror. A swarm of dazzling white bees completely surrounded the baby. The insects crawled across her tiny face, hovered over her lips, and one by one disappeared inside her open mouth. Yet Rita did not cry. She did not move. She slept peacefully, as if wrapped in invisible protection. Her parents expected screams. Instead, there was only silence. Witnesses later claimed the bees entered and left her mouth carrying droplets of golden honey without leaving a single sting or wound upon her delicate skin. In medieval Italy, where every unusual event was interpreted as a message from heaven or a warning from eternity, the villagers were convinced they had witnessed a supernatural sign. Years later, another story spread throughout the region. A farmer accidentally cut his hand with a sickle while approaching the cradle. Blood poured from the deep wound until he stopped to marvel at the strange spectacle of the bees surrounding the infant. According to ancient tradition, as he stood there gazing at the child, his injured hand suddenly ceased bleeding, and the wound began to close before his eyes. Whether every detail survived the centuries unchanged or became embellished through devotion, one belief remained constant among those who knew Rita. From the very beginning, her life seemed marked by mysteries that defied ordinary explanation. As Rita grew older, her heart desired only one thing. She longed to become a nun. She dreamed of spending her life behind monastery walls, praying in peace, serving Christ, and avoiding the cruelty that surrounded the world outside. But in 14th century Italy, daughters rarely chose their own future. Her elderly parents loved her deeply, yet they believed marriage offered the only secure path for a young woman. Hoping to protect her and preserve peace between influential families, they arranged her marriage to a local nobleman named Paolo Mancini. For Rita, the wedding was not the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Paolo possessed courage and influence, but he was also known for his explosive temper. He lived in a society where honor was defended with swords, insults were answered with murder, and vengeance passed from father to son like an inheritance. The Mancini family was deeply entangled in the bloody vendettas that plagued medieval Umbria. Entire generations were consumed by retaliation. Every killing demanded another. Every funeral promised another funeral. Rita entered that world as a young bride carrying only faith. Inside their home, Paolo's violent nature soon became impossible to hide. His anger erupted without warning. His words became weapons before his fists did. Arguments echoed through the house like distant thunder, and many accounts preserved by tradition describe years of humiliation, emotional suffering, and domestic abuse. Yet Rita responded in a way that bewildered everyone around her. She refused hatred. She answered cruelty with patience. She met insults with silence. Every night she prayed, not for revenge, but for the conversion of the man who caused her so much pain. Years passed. Many would have surrendered to bitterness. She never did. Neighbors slowly noticed subtle changes. Paolo's outbursts became less frequent. His face, once hardened by pride and rage, began to soften. The woman he had wounded for so many years never stopped believing that grace could transform even the most violent soul. Against every expectation, it happened. The feared warrior gradually abandoned his old life. He sought reconciliation with former enemies and attempted to end the endless cycle of bloodshed that had defined his family for decades. But hatred rarely forgives those who abandon it. One evening, Paolo never returned home. His body was discovered lying on a lonely road, brutally murdered by members of a rival family seeking vengeance for old crimes. The transformation Rita had prayed for had come too late to save his life. She buried her husband with tears, not because she had forgotten the years of suffering, but because she had witnessed the miracle of a hardened heart learning repentance before death. Yet an even greater tragedy was waiting. Their two sons, now young men, looked upon their father's corpse and made a terrible vow. They would avenge him. In medieval Italy, such an oath was considered sacred. To refuse revenge was viewed as weakness. To forgive was seen as dishonor. Rita recognized the darkness growing inside her children. Every conversation ended with the same burning promise: blood for blood, death for death. Night after night, she pleaded with them to abandon vengeance. She reminded them that another murder would only condemn more souls and continue a war that might never end. They refused to listen. As their determination hardened, Rita faced the most agonizing spiritual dilemma imaginable. She loved her sons more than her own life, yet she feared something even worse than their death. She feared the eternal ruin of their souls. Unable to change their hearts, she withdrew into prayer with unimaginable anguish. According to centuries-old Catholic tradition, Rita begged God for a mercy that few could even imagine asking. If her sons could not be prevented from becoming murderers, then may the Lord call them before they committed that mortal sin. It was not a prayer born from despair. It was the desperate cry of a mother who believed eternal salvation mattered more than earthly survival. Within months, disease swept through the region. A violent epidemic, described in traditional accounts as a devastating plague, struck both young men. Despite every attempt to save them, their condition rapidly worsened. Rita remained constantly beside their beds. She cared for them day and night. She prayed over them. She forgave every harsh word they had spoken. As death approached, the fire of vengeance that had consumed their hearts slowly faded. According to devotional tradition, both sons reconciled themselves with God before taking their final breaths. Then silence filled the house. In only a few years, Rita had lost her parents, her husband, and now both of her children. The home that once echoed with voices became unbearably still. She stood completely alone, a widow surrounded by memories, carrying grief almost too heavy for any human heart to bear. Yet this devastating loneliness would become the doorway to an extraordinary chapter of her life, one that no locked gate, no human rejection, and no earthly obstacle would be able to prevent. Had you ever heard of Saint Rita before today? Have you or anyone you know ever received a blessing, a miracle, or the intercession of Saint Rita? Write it down in the comments below. I read every single one of your comments, and I'll leave a heart on yours. If this story warms your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family so they can strengthen their faith too. The saints were forgotten once, and together, we will never let that happen again. Chapter 2. The Sealed Gate and the Supernatural Flight. After burying her husband and both of her sons, Rita returned to a house that no longer felt like a home. The rooms were painfully silent. Every object carried a memory. The table reminded her of meals shared with people who were now gone. The doorway seemed to preserve the shadow of her husband returning from the road. In the darkness, she could almost imagine hearing the footsteps of her sons moving through the house. But whenever she turned, there was no one there. Rita had lost everything that had once defined her earthly life. She was no longer a wife. She was no longer a mother. Her parents were also dead. In the eyes of the world, she was a widow without protection, descendants, or a clear future. Yet beneath her grief, an old desire began to rise again. the desire she had carried since childhood. She wanted to enter a monastery. Rita believed that, after years of violence, fear, and loss, the time had finally come for her to dedicate the remainder of her life entirely to God. Near Cascia stood the Augustinian monastery of Saint Mary Magdalene, a place of prayer enclosed behind heavy walls and guarded doors. To Rita, those walls represented peace, but the doors did not open. When she presented herself to the community and asked to be admitted, the nuns refused her request. The rejection was not necessarily an act of cruelty. Monastic communities followed strict rules, and many convents preferred to receive unmarried young women rather than widows. Rita's past also carried a far more dangerous problem. Her husband had been murdered. The feud between his family and his killers had not completely disappeared. Blood had already been spilled, and the name Mancini remained connected to old wounds. The sisters feared that allowing Rita inside might bring the violence of the vendetta directly to the monastery. What if her husband's relatives came searching for revenge? What if the rival family attacked the convent? What if the monastery became another battlefield? Rita returned home devastated, but she did not surrender. She approached the convent again. Once more, she was refused. Some traditions claim she applied 3 separate times. Each time, the answer remained the same. The doors stayed closed, and the woman who had survived marriage, murder, disease, and unbearable grief now faced a different kind of suffering. She was rejected from the very place where she believed she belonged. The refusal forced Rita to confront the unfinished violence surrounding her husband's death. Before she could enter a community dedicated to peace, she would have to become an instrument of peace outside its walls. She began approaching members of the hostile family. This was not merely uncomfortable, it was dangerous. In the brutal culture of medieval vendettas, reconciliation could be viewed as betrayal. Men were expected to defend family honor with blood. Forgiveness was often interpreted as cowardice, and ancient grudges could survive for generations. Yet Rita moved between the opposing sides, pleading with them to end the hatred that had already destroyed her own family. She spoke to her husband's relatives, asking them to abandon revenge. She approached those associated with his murder, urging them to seek peace. Perhaps some mocked her, perhaps others suspected a trap, but Rita continued. She had seen where hatred led. She had watched it poison her husband's life, consume the hearts of her sons, and leave her alone among the dead. Eventually, according to tradition, the rival families agreed to reconciliation. The cycle of vengeance was broken. Rita had accomplished what swords, threats, and political authority had failed to achieve. She had persuaded enemies to forgive one another. Even then, however, the monastery did not immediately become hers. One night, Rita remained alone in her house in Roccaporina. The doors were secured. The village outside had fallen into darkness, and the mountains stood silent beneath the night sky. She began to pray. Catholic tradition says that Rita had developed a profound devotion to 3 heavenly protectors: Saint John the Baptist, Saint Augustine, and Saint Nicholas of Tolentino. John the Baptist represented courage and repentance. Augustine, whose spiritual rule guided the monastery she desired to enter, embodied the restless soul transformed by grace. Nicholas of Tolentino was revered as a powerful intercessor for those suffering seemingly impossible trials. As Rita prayed, the ordinary world appeared to disappear around her. The silence deepened. Her awareness of the room faded. Then, according to the ancient devotional account, the 3 saints appeared before her. What happened next became one of the most mysterious episodes associated with her life. Rita was lifted from her home. Some versions describe her being carried through the air. Others say she was transported in a mystical state that no human explanation could account for. She passed over the darkened landscape of Roccaporina and Cascia, beyond roads and walls, toward the monastery that had repeatedly denied her entrance. The convent was sealed for the night. Its heavy exterior doors were locked from within. The windows were secured. The sisters slept behind walls designed to keep the outside world away. No visitor could enter without being seen. No ordinary person could cross those barriers. Yet when morning came, the nuns discovered Rita inside the monastery. She was found quietly praying in the inner cloister, beyond every locked gate. The sisters were stunned. They searched for an open door. There was none. They examined the windows. They remained secured. No guard had admitted her. No sister had unlocked the entrance. There was no hidden passage through which she could have entered. The widow they had rejected was now kneeling in the heart of their protected enclosure. For the community, the message seemed impossible to ignore. The doors they had closed to Rita had apparently been opened by a power beyond their authority. She was finally admitted into the Augustinian community. But entering the monastery did not mean that Rita would be treated as someone extraordinary. The mystical event did not place her above the other sisters. Instead, she was expected to submit to discipline, silence, labor, and obedience. According to one famous tradition, the Mother Superior decided to test her humility with an assignment that appeared completely meaningless. She handed Rita a dry piece of wood, sometimes described as a dead vine branch, and ordered her to plant it in the ground. Then came the humiliating command. Rita was to water it every day. The branch had no leaves. It had no visible roots. There was no sign of life inside it. It was nothing more than dead wood buried in the soil. Still, Rita obeyed. Each day, she carried water to the garden. She poured it over the lifeless branch. The sisters passed nearby and watched her repeat the useless task. Some may have seen it as a test. Others may have regarded it as a strange punishment. Season after season, Rita continued watering what appeared incapable of ever growing. She did not demand an explanation. She did not complain that the task was absurd. She simply obeyed. Then something changed beneath the soil. From the dead wood, roots began to form. A small green shoot emerged. Leaves appeared where no life should have remained. The dried branch gradually became a living grapevine, spreading across the monastery garden and producing fruit. The vine would become one of the most enduring symbols of Rita's life. What appeared dead was not necessarily beyond restoration. Within the monastery walls, Rita had finally found the place she had sought since childhood. But the years ahead wouldn't bring only peace. Her prayers were becoming increasingly intense. Her meditation on the suffering of Christ grew deeper, more physical, and more mysterious. And before her life ended, the body that had endured marriage, grief, rejection, and obedience would carry a wound that no veil could hide. Chapter 3. The thorn in her forehead and the fragrance of the miracle. Years passed within the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene, and Rita's life became increasingly hidden from the outside world. She followed the rhythm of the Augustinian community. Prayer before sunrise, silent work, fasting, service, and long hours of meditation. To the other sisters, she appeared humble and obedient. Yet behind that quiet exterior, something intense was happening within her soul. Rita had become deeply devoted to the passion of Christ. She contemplated the betrayal, the abandonment, the crown of thorns, and the crucifixion not as distant events, but as living mysteries. She did not merely want to understand Christ's suffering intellectually. She desired to participate in it, to feel, in some small way, the pain of the one she believed had suffered for humanity. This desire was dangerous in its intensity. One day, Rita knelt before a painted crucifix inside the monastery. The chapel was still. The faces of Christ and his sorrowful mother looked down from the sacred images as candlelight trembled against the wall. Rita fixed her eyes upon the crown of thorn. She prayed that she might be allowed to share one fragment of that suffering. Not the glory, not the visions, only the pain. According to the ancient traditions surrounding her life, something extraordinary occurred. A thorn seemed to detach itself from the crown upon the crucifix, or a ray of light shot from the image. and struck Rita directly in the forehead. She collapsed beneath the sudden shock. When the other sisters reached her, they discovered a wound above her brow. It was not an imagined mark. It was not a temporary scratch. The injury remained. From that moment forward, Rita carried what Catholic devotion came to regard as a partial stigma, a physical sign associated with the wounds of Christ. Unlike the marks traditionally reported on the hands, feet, or side of other mystics, Rita's wound appeared on her forehead, corresponding to the crown of thorns. At first, the sisters attempted to treat it. They cleaned the wound and covered it with cloth. They applied the simple remedies available in the 15th century, but nothing seemed to heal it. The injury repeatedly reopened. It became painful and difficult to conceal. In devotional accounts, it eventually produced an unpleasant odor, making Rita's presence difficult for some members of the community to endure. The woman who had spent her life seeking the monastery's shelter was now increasingly separated from those who lived within it. She was placed in a more isolated room. There, away from the common spaces, Rita lived with the wound for approximately 15 years. Her isolation was not only physical. She had once lost her husband and children and returned to an empty house. Now, within the monastery she had struggled so fiercely to enter, she again experienced silence and separation. Yet she did not ask for the wound to be removed. For Rita, suffering was not proof that God had abandoned her. It became a mysterious place of communion, a burden she believed had been permitted for a spiritual purpose beyond her understanding. Only once, according to tradition, did the wound temporarily disappear. The sisters planned a pilgrimage to Rome during a holy year. Rita longed to accompany them, but the wound and its odor made travel with the community difficult. The superior reportedly told her that she could go only if the mark healed. Rita prayed. The wound closed. The skin of her forehead became calm enough for her to join the pilgrimage. She traveled to Rome, visited churches, prayed at sacred sites, and walked among crowds of pilgrims who knew nothing of the hidden suffering she carried. But when she returned to the monastery in Cascia, the wound opened again. The thorn's mark remained with her until the final years of her life. As Rita grew older, her body weakened. She became seriously ill and spent long periods confined to bed. Her strength faded, but stories of her holiness began spreading beyond the convent walls. People came seeking prayers. The grieving asked for comfort. Families divided by conflict asked for peace. Those facing situations that appeared hopeless began associating Rita with impossible causes because her own life had repeatedly passed through circumstances that seemed impossible to survive. During one harsh winter, a relative visited Rita in the monastery. Before leaving, the woman asked whether Rita desired anything from her childhood home in Rocca Porena. Rita gave an answer that appeared irrational. She asked for a rose from the garden. Outside, the land was frozen. Snow covered the village. No rose should have been blooming. The relative assumed that illness had confused Rita's mind. Nevertheless, upon returning to Rocca Porena, she went to the old garden. There, emerging from the winter landscape, she found a single red rose. She cut it and carried it back to the monastery. Later, Rita asked for 2 figs from the same garden. Despite the cold season, they too were reportedly found. For those who loved her, the rose became more than a botanical mystery. It symbolized Rita's entire existence, life emerging where nothing should grow, mercy appearing in the middle of violence, and hope surviving beneath the frozen weight of suffering. On May 22, 1457, Rita's final hours approached. The monastery gathered around her. The woman who had entered the convent through an impossible mystery now lay weak and motionless in her cell. Her breathing slowed. The wound on her forehead remained visible. Then she died. According to the devotional tradition, at the exact moment of her death, the unpleasant odor associated with the wound vanished. In its place came a powerful fragrance resembling roses. The scent spread through the room and into the monastery corridors. Bells were also said to have rung without human hands, announcing her death to the surrounding community. Her body was not buried immediately in the ordinary manner. Reports of extraordinary favors connected to Rita began almost at once. People approached her remains to pray. Her reputation spread from Cascia into the surrounding regions, and the monastery preserved her body for public veneration. Over time, devotees reported that her remains resisted normal decay. The body is still displayed today in the Basilica of Santa Rita in Cascia, enclosed within a glass shrine. Traditions developed claiming that her eyes sometimes opened, that her position occasionally changed, or that the body reacted before disasters. Such stories belong to popular devotion and cannot always be historically confirmed, yet they reveal how strongly generations of believers came to associate Rita with the mysterious boundary between suffering, death, and hope. Near the place where she had lived in obedience, the miraculous vine continued growing. The rose remained her symbol, and upon her forehead, the memory of the thorn became the final sign of a life shaped by wounds that, in the eyes of faith, were never meaningless.